In recent weeks, we finally had a definitive 2019 Formula One rules package published by the FIA. No major surprises in there, all the things that we were expecting, the minor tweaks, and then some of the more significant ones to areas such as the front wing. I've got Ben Anderson and our technical editor Jake Boxall-Legge here to talk to me about the changes and what we've learned and what we know now is the definitive set of rules that the teams are working towards for next year. Jake, we're going to start with you, put you on the spot. Can you just talk us through everything that is now locked in, the changes that we're going to see on the cars for next year?
Sure. So I think the most pertinent changes to the front wing, it's going to be a lot more simple compared to what it has been the last couple of years. All the little flicks and tricks and vortex tunnels, they're all gone. And it's also going to be 200 millimeters wider as well. So the idea behind this is to try and add a little bit more front end downforce, and with the goal of trying to make cars easier to follow. What we've also got is a change to the end plates as well. They're standardized now, rather than having, dramatic outwash. They're going to be a little bit more simple. Teams are going to be able to derive a little bit less performance from that area of the car. And again, it's just improving the sensitivity of the front wing, making it less sensitive. What we've also got is a change to the geometry around the brake ducts. This is going to be a lot more simple. You've got less flicks in that area as well. It's going to be shorter, and it's going to rely on the barge boards to get the front end downforce down. So the barge boards, they've been pushed forward by 100 millimeters. They're going to be longer, but vertically they're going to be shorter as well. So around the front of the floor, the team is going to have to work that area of the car a little bit harder with less bodywork available to them. And perhaps the biggest change as well is at the rear wing as well. It's bigger in every facet. It's taller, it's wider, it's longer. So the end plates are a little bit less complicated. All the little gills and little slots are going to be removed. And this is going to have a little bit of an effect on reducing the turbulence from the rear end. It's a deeper rear wing as well. There's a considerable amount more camber than there has been in the past. The DRS opens up a lot more as well by 20 millimeters, and that's going to increase the effectiveness by quite a dramatic amount. And there, as I say, it's more cambered, and the idea is to push airflow up further. And so the wake behind the car, the slipstream, is going to be effectively bigger. At least that's the intention. And then when the car's following, it's going to have less of an effect on the front wing, and that sort of continues the chain down the car.
So of all those changes, there's quite a few significant areas of car development that we've focused on in the last few years, especially under the current regulation cycle that we're in. Those have been the main areas that teams have really worked and put a lot of their effort and resource into. Which of those changes you've outlined there do you think is going to have the biggest impact for the teams on their car designs?
I think it's going to be a combination of the two wings. I don't think that the rest of the changes are going to have too much of an impact, but the front wing certainly, with a wider base, teams are going to be able to produce a little bit more front end downforce. As I say, the end plates are now standardized, and it's going to be really interesting to see how teams recoup performance in that area, and in combination with the rear wing as well. It's going to be interesting to see whether the effects that the FIA and Formula One have intended on having, whether that's going to actually happen or not, or whether they've got it wrong or not. We're going to have to wait and see.
Ben, we've all lived and worked through several F1 regulations shake-ups. This is kind of a first step before the big changes we're expecting for 2021. But should we be expecting any chance of the order getting mixed up for 19? Is there any chance that a team like Mercedes or Ferrari are going to get something like the front wing fundamentally wrong and plummet down the order?
I think there's always a chance that teams will slip up and misunderstand something and maybe start the season on the back foot. We saw in the start of the 2017 season, Red Bull misstep with the new aerodynamics there, and it took them a few races to recover that, but only a few races. I don't see really potential in this package to cause a massive shake-up. We hope really that the biggest shake-up is to the on-track battling in the racing. You mentioned the effect of the DRS being greater and the potential for slipstreaming to be easier and for cars to lose less downforce when they're following other cars. So if the on-track battles are better, you'll have the chance of the order being shaken up by somebody who gets stuck behind another driver at a race this year, potentially no longer getting stuck behind that driver. Conversely, perhaps the DRS effect will be too great and suddenly we'll see the passes become even more uncontested, too easy, and that will create potentially a bit of backlash. I imagine most of the top teams will claw back any downforce they lose from the simplification of the wings through the bargeboard area and the floor. That the danger when you isolate one area or a couple of areas of the car for changes without doing the whole thing is that teams will just look elsewhere to claw back the performance. And I know some Formula 1 teams in the summer were already saying, yeah, we can get the downforce back with the barge boards that we're going to lose, so it won't make any difference.
Yeah, F1 teams never stand still. Now, Jake, one of the interesting things you said there was that even though we have a simplified front wing for next year, the teams will potentially, because of the dimensions, be able to produce more downforce. Is that because actually a lot of the bits we're getting rid of from the front wing weren't necessarily pure downforce producing parts? They were about managing the air further back on the car and pushing air around the front tyres?
Absolutely. You sort of got to think of the car as like almost a relay, for example. The front wing works a lot of the air, and that's then taken to the barge boards and then to the rear of the car as well. And a lot of components on the front wing were there just to do that, just to manage flow. And for example, the vortex tunnels, for example, that you get on the current wings at the ends by the end plates, that's not going to produce a lot of downforce because it's a completely different dimension. It's there to do something else entirely. It's to push air around the front of the tyre. And with a more conventional front wing, if you like, it's just going to be there for, they're going to have to do some kind of management of flow, and they're going to have to be really smart about how they do it. But yeah, generally I think there's going to be more front end downforce, and again, that's to combat the loss of downforce you get in what's considered as dirty air.
Now, Ben, we mentioned briefly earlier on the 2021 changes, and these bits that we're seeing for next year are just parts of that project that have been brought forward because the FIA and the teams worked together and decided, right, we can do this bit, and this bit sooner, so let's bring them forward. Do you think there's a risk that perhaps expectations will be too high for the impact that we'll see next year, and there could actually be a negative effect on the work that's being done for 2021?
Yeah, I think that's potentially the case. This feels a bit like a knee-jerk reaction to the Australian Grand Prix, which was considered a boring race and nobody could overtake.
It was a boring race.
Yeah, and they happen, and there's no doubt that Formula 1 could look at many areas to reform, and is. But the danger when you isolate things, as I mentioned earlier, is that you create unintended consequences. You don't necessarily achieve everything you want to achieve, and also you give the teams a head start. So if you're trying to draw up this package for 2021 that looks at everything structurally around the car as well as things to do with budget caps and rules, that's a lot for the teams to get their heads around. If you start releasing bits early like they've done here with the simplified front wings, it gives teams a chance to get a head start on what they're going to do and work out what those unintended consequences are and start managing them. And of course then when you get to the major rule change in 2021, the bigger, better funded teams who can do more research and more development and more learning will have a head start baked in before you get going.